Alright, so in this video we're going to start talking about AutoCAD. AutoCAD is going to be the first application that we discuss in this course, and we're going to be working on it for the next probably 3 or 4 weeks or so. Alright, so what is AutoCAD? First, before we define what AutoCAD is, we need to look at the word CAD, which is the second half of AutoCAD. So CAD stands for Computer Aided Design. All right, that is a common thing that gets mixed up. A lot of people usually think that means computer aided drafting, but it actually means computer aided design. So remember that. There are a dozen of CAD software packages available, and each one is created with specific design and manufacturing processes in mind. Okay. So the term CAD, that is a general term within the design world that does not necessarily relate to a single application. So AutoCAD is a CAD program, but is not the only CAD program. All right. There are a lot of other CAD programs such as Fusion 360 for manufacturing, or SolidWorks, or AutoCAD. There's a lot of different ones available. So just keep in mind that CAD doesn't always only refer to AutoCAD. A lot of people abbreviate AutoCAD to CAD, but it has a greater meaning outside the world of just interior design. In the AEC industry, so architecture, engineering, and construction industry, CAD is typically short for AutoCAD. All right, so if you're discussing the program with a colleague and you just say CAD, they're going to assume that you're probably talking about AutoCAD. If you go to talk to an engineer and you discuss CAD, they might think you're referring to, something else, maybe not something specifically related to AutoCAD. So just keep that in mind. All right, so AutoCAD. What is AutoCAD? Specifically, it is a program that you're going to be using to do 2D drafting. It also has basic 3D modeling tools and components tied into it, but for our purposes, we're only going to be using it for 2D stuff. Later on, when we get more into Revit and 3D like that, we will have to refer back to AutoCAD because there are a lot of 3D models that are generated using AutoCAD that we will then pull into Revit. But for right now, for the next few weeks or so, we're only going to be using AutoCAD for its 2D drafting abilities. Okay? So AutoCAD, it comes in a bunch of different versions. The version that we'll be using is what's known as the vanilla version, and that's what's simply called AutoCAD. But then you also have a bunch of other versions that are like specific to different disciplines, okay? So engineering, they might use a version of AutoCAD specifically tied to engineering, such as AutoCAD Civil or AutoCAD Mechanical or Electrical. And then there are other versions that are specifically related to architecture too, like AutoCAD Architecture. When you go to download AutoCAD, you'll probably see all these other options. But just know that you want the base version. And the reason that we use the base version is because that's what pretty much all architecture firms or interior design firms use. The reason for this is because features that are included within the architecture specific version of AutoCAD, when you start using those, you might as well go to a tool like Revit, which is a lot better. They can do similar things, but just the implementation with Revit is a lot better. So instead of focusing on AutoCAD for like the more 3D and architecture specific functions, usually designers and architects just go over to Revit for that. So they pretty much only use AutoCAD for just a drafting tool, and that's what we're going to be doing too. All right, as the AEC industry evolves, BIM platforms like Revit are becoming more and more dominant, and AutoCAD is starting to become less and less relevant. All right, so when you go to work in an office, nowadays, a lot of them are moving on to platforms like Revit, and Revit is the last program that we're going to be covering in this class, but basically that is a 3D modeling program. And it does a lot of things that AutoCAD can't do. And AutoCAD is a much more manual program. You have to do a lot of things more manually, whereas in Revit, a lot of things are done for you automatically. Now that might make AutoCAD sound like a bad choice to use, but actually AutoCAD has its place in the industry still. In some ways it's outdated, in some ways it's a lot simpler than newer tools, and because of that there's a lot more flexibility that comes with it. So it's important for you guys to learn, because when you get out there in the field, lots of offices still use it for day-to-day work, and there are some offices, especially like smaller ones, that use it exclusively instead of newer programs like Revit. And the reason for this is because it's very affordable, and it's a lot more easily accessible, I guess, than some of the other programs. And a lot of smaller firms, if they don't have the resources to get something that's more advanced, they will usually just use AutoCAD exclusively. So it's really important to be familiar with AutoCAD and understand how it's used and how to use it. Even though, going forward in this program, you might not be using it all the time, you still need to, understand it and have a background with it. All right. So what is it good for? It's good for 2D drafting, like I said. It can do basic 3D modeling. It's really good for quick concept generation. So a lot of the times when you're just trying to come up with a layout or something like that, when you go into a more advanced tool like Revit, it could be a little bit harder to just get your ideas out there and explore different configuration options. So that's where AutoCAD comes in, and it's just really good for sketching something out, okay? Just think of pen and paper. It's very much the same thing, but you can draw, 2D drafted lines and get hard dimensions and stuff where you can't get that with just drawing it on pen and paper. Many firms use it for full CD set production. Like I said, a lot of the times these are smaller firms, but in some cases it's even bigger firms too. So the firm that I work at, Vocon, we use sort of a 50-50 mix of AutoCAD and Revit, and it really just depends on the particular project team and everyone's background, okay? So in the architecture studio at our company, they're pretty much only using Revit for their work, but the interiors people use AutoCAD a lot more. Part of that is because it's what they're used to, it's what they're familiar with, but part of that also is because sometimes their projects just don't need all the features that are included with a tool like Revit, all right? So really important to be familiar with it, like I said earlier. All right, benefits of AutoCAD. It's fairly easy to understand. I mean, basically it's just drawing, okay? Just drawing shapes. Drawings consist of simple shapes like lines, arcs, circles, and rectangles. And also it's very unrestrictive. When you get into more advanced programs like Revit, there's a lot of things they go run into, like constraints that are going to be holding you back from doing maybe exactly what you want to do. So from a standpoint of flexibility, AutoCAD is really good. You can pretty much draw whatever you want and however you want it. And it is a lot more affordable than Revit, right? So negatives of AutoCAD. Drawing in AutoCAD can be very tedious and repetitive. Every view of a building that you want to represent, you have to draw it manually, okay? You have to draw every single line, put in every single object. It's a very manual process. Anytime a revision needs to be made, if that revision is present in more than one drawing, so for example, say I have a kitchen layout and I change the cabinetry on one of my walls. Maybe I get rid of that and I don't have any more cabinetry on that wall. Well, if I've already drawn up the elevation of that wall showing the cabinetry, since I deleted it in the floor plan, I'm then going to have to go and I'm going to have to manually edit that elevation drawing too to pick up that change, okay? So anytime you change something, anywhere it's visible, any drawing that represents that element, you have to go around and keep track of all those changes and manually update them all. So this can be a really time-consuming and tedious process, and sometimes you even overlook things and make mistakes. It's just a lot easier to make mistakes in AutoCAD than other programs if you're not keeping track of everything, all right? And then last of all, it's 2D, okay? So for our purposes, we're only using the 2D aspects of AutoCAD. And because of that, like I said, it just makes things more complicated. If you have something in 3D, it's really a lot easier to generate drawings from it and make changes and stuff. So that's maybe the biggest drawback of AutoCAD. But it's also its biggest strength because with it being 2D, it's also just very simple. Okay, it's very easy to jump into and understand how it works and what it does. Like I said previously, utilizing the architecture-specific tools in AutoCAD, such as the AutoCAD architecture-specific version, can solve a lot of the problems that you'll run into. However, at that point, you would probably be better off using a BIM software like Revit instead, okay? BIM, that stands for Building Information Modeling. That's just the type of program that Revit is. We'll talk more about BIM later on when we get into Revit. All right, so next we're going to be talking a little bit about the AutoCAD user interface. All right, so when we first open AutoCAD, we're going to run into the start screen. All right, so the start screen is greeting us with a big button here that says Start Drawing. But below that, we have this little drop-down arrow that pulls out this menu for us. And what this arrow does is it shows us all of the templates that are available to us, okay? So what a template does, I'm sure you're familiar with the term template, but basically that's just it's a pre-made sort of placeholder for us that has a bunch of predefined components within it. All right, so if you just hit Start Drawing without choosing a template, basically you're just opening AutoCAD with nothing pre-made and you'll have to do everything from scratch. Now, if we use a specific template, such as one that's specifically made for architecture interiors, it might come with a bunch of stuff that is made for us that will help save us some time. For instance, we're going to be using what are called drawing layers. So each line in the drawing is going to have to be on a specific layer, and those layers have specific naming conventions associated with them that are, standard for interior design and architecture. If we don't use a template, we'll have to make each of those layers individually, and sometimes there can be it can range from dozens to hundreds of layers within a single drawing. And if you have to do all that manually, it takes forever. So that's why we use templates, because everything is pre-made for us. And so when we start our new drawing, we don't have to worry about doing all this rework and making everything from scratch. All those things are going to be in there automatically when we start the new project, okay? And we'll get into this a little bit more when we actually start, working in AutoCAD. You'll see me use some of these templates. All right, so once we start our new drawing, we're going to be greeted with the main AutoCAD user interface. All right, this is what we're always going to be seeing when we're working in AutoCAD. So here I've broken down the different areas of the user interface, and we're going to be going through them individually one by one. But each of these highlighted regions are corresponding to these different labels, okay? So you'll see these individually as we go through the slideshow. All right, so first we have what's known as the application menu. All right, so the application menu is this area up here with the big A, all right? And that is used to open and browse for files. All right, so when we hit that, we're going to get a traditional file menu like you're used to. That's where our save command, open command is, save as, exit, all those types of things. And there's also options to export out files to other formats. And then we can also publish our file. Okay, we'll talk about what that means in greater detail later on. All right, next is the ribbon. The ribbon is, I would say, the primary part of the AutoCAD user interface. It's also probably the most important part of the user interface. So each command that we have available to us is listed within the ribbon as a specific button. All right, so here you can see, for example, we have the move button, the copy button, the stretch, rotate, mirror, scale, all of those buttons. All right. Each of these buttons are organized into a specific panel. All right, it might be a little bit hard to see here because of this overlay that I have on here, but if you look closely, you can see that each of these panels are divided by a gray line that runs between them. And then here you can see the name of each of the individual panels. So all the tools within this panel here, the draw panel, are going to be used for drawing. Okay, so these are shapes like lines, polylines, circles, and arcs. All right, we also have rectangles, ellipses, and then this is the hatch. All right, so a hatch is like a pochette. All right, next we have modify. Within the modify panel, we have tools that are used to change something about the objects that we've drawn using the draw tools. Okay, so we have move, copy, stretch, rotate, mirror, scale. All these are going to in some way modify the shapes that we've drawn already. Next we have annotate. Annotate is to add things like text and dimensions to our drawing. Then we have layers. This is what I was talking about on one of the previous slides. So here we have layers, and this is our layer manager. And this little drop-down box right here is to show us all the layers that are currently within the drawing. All right, so we'll talk about layers in more detail when we get to actually drawing things. But like I said, you can have dozens to hundreds of layers in your project, and this is where you manage them. After that, we have the blocks section. We're going to talk about blocks later on in this presentation, but this is just a quick area that you can go to insert blocks into your drawing. Over here, we have properties. The properties little tab right here, that is used to change certain characteristics of the objects that you have drawn. So for instance, if we've drawn like a circle or a line, we can select it and then go here to change maybe the line type. So is it a solid line? Is it a dashed line? We can change the line color and we can change its thickness, you know, stuff like that. And then further down, we have things like groups, utilities, clipboard view. These are less important. We won't talk about them as much, but you know, you will use them from time to time. It's more situational though. These ones over here, I'd say from draw to layer, these are the most important ones that you'll be focusing on the majority of the time. All right, so next we have what's known as the properties palette. This is usually displayed on the left-hand side of the user interface. And by the way, any of these panels that I've discussed previous, or this palette over here, these can be configured and placed wherever you want on the AutoCAD user interface. So you can just click and drag on the top portion of them and drag them and pin them to whatever portion of the user interface you like. I usually like to keep it like this, how it is, with the properties on the side. But if you'd like something else better, you can change it to that. That's just as fine. It's all personal preference. This isn't always available by default, this properties panel. Sometimes you have to turn it on manually. So if you open up the AutoCAD user interface and it's not there, you might have to enter the properties command down here. This area down here we'll talk about next, which is the command bar. But basically you would click inside of there, type properties, hit enter, and this would appear for you. So what the properties does is it's basically like the properties panel that's up here, except it's a little bit more in depth, okay? It displays controllable attributes and general information about an object that you have selected. All right, so if I had a circle here and I click on it, this information would update and it would give me all the information specific to that circle, like how big it is, what its radius is, what the line type is, what layer it's on, all that type of stuff. And this is probably the second most important part of the user interface, if I'm being honest. You're going to be going between the ribbon and the properties panel a lot. All right, so next we have layout tabs. And the layout tabs are these little tabs down here toward the bottom. And what these tabs do, they're used to switch between two different modes that we have in AutoCAD, okay? We have what we're looking at right now, this sort of dark colored background with the grid. That's known as the model space, all right? The model space is what you're going to be using to draw all your shapes in. It's basically just an infinite expanse of space, and you just draw all your objects inside of it, all right? Beside that, you can see this little tab right here. It says, this one says D-size layout, but that is what's known as paper space, all right? So we'll talk about paper space later on when we're actually going through an actual drawing, but paper space is what you toggle to lay out drawings onto sheets, okay? It looks nothing at all like what you're seeing here. Basically, it's taking you to an actual sheet of paper, a digital representation of a sheet of paper, and that's where you're going to be putting actual drawings onto layouts, okay? And you can see next to that is a little plus sign. That's just to add more sheets of paper, okay? But we'll talk about that in greater detail as we go forward a little bit here. Next, we have the command line, okay? So the command line is referring to this gray bar that we have running across here. Sorry that this little thing keeps popping up. But basically, what we use the command line for is to actually type in commands, okay? So inside of AutoCAD, you can either use commands by clicking on them from the ribbon up here. So if I want to draw a line, I have the option to either go up here and click on the line tool, or I can use the command line down here and I can actually type in the word line and hit enter. And that's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to start the line command, and I can go in and I can just start clicking points and drawing my line in. All right, so any typed commands display down here. You'll see once you enter command and hit enter, the command that you're using will be displayed within this line. It's going to tell you that you're using the line command or the circle command or whatever it is. It also will contain prompts and instructions for completing steps inside a command. So as we use different commands, we're going to have options within each of those commands that is specific to each command, okay? All right, so here I am inside of AutoCAD, and if I go ahead and just do a command like circle, now if you look down here within the command line, you can see that I get directions for what to do with my command. So it says first to specify the center point for the circle. So if I click and drag, you can see now it's telling me down there to specify the radius of the circle, or I can specify the diameter by clicking on this. Also, if you look closely, you'll notice that the D in the word diameter is highlighted blue, and that means that if I just type the letter D and hit enter, it's going to automatically do that diameter command for me instead of me having to click on it. So now if I hit enter, you can see it says specify diameter of circle. All right, so if I just type in a diameter of maybe like 2 foot 0 inches and hit enter, then it's going to make a circle that's 2 foot 0 inches. But basically, I just wanted you to see that whenever you do a command, it's going to give you directions in the command line, and it's also going to give you certain options. Maybe a better example is the scale command. So if I were to do, I'm just going to type that one in. So we can actually click in this and type scale. Okay, so now you can see we're in the scale command, and it asks me select the object I want to scale. So I'm going to select the circle, and then I'm going to hit enter. Now it's asking me to specify a base point to scale from, so I'm just going to click on the side here. And now you can see, unlike the circle option, we get multiple options inside of scale. So we get a copy option and we get a reference option. So basically, in this instance, what copy would do, copy would make a duplicate version of the circle that is scaled either up or down, but it will leave the original intact. So if I click on that and I create a new circle that's scaled up, you can see it left the original. All right, so next up we have the origin. The origin is the centermost point of your drawing, all right? So basically this is a really good reference point for you in case you get lost out in the infinite space of this model space here. Believe it or not, it's really easy to sort of lose track of where your drawing is and get way far out here. So the bounds of this space that you're seeing right now, like I said previously, these go to infinity. And sometimes you can just get way lost outside of them and you can lose track of your drawing. So using a command like zoom to origin, you can easily return to the very center point of your drawing and locate where your actual drawing is inside of this space. So the coordinates of the origin are 0, 0. And you can think of the origin like a graph inside of your math classes that you've taken in the past. So you have different quadrants, and at the very center of those quadrants is your origin point. And all of your drawings should be positioned near this point, all right? And the reason for that is, like I said, to keep track of them in case you lose your orientation inside of the model space, but also other applications reference this origin point whenever you go to export drawings out of AutoCAD and import them into another application. It's going to use this origin point as sort of a baseline for where to insert the drawing into that other application. So it's important that you keep them as close to this as possible. Whenever I start a new drawing, I like to make sure at least one of the corners of the drawing intersects right on this origin point, just for easy reference. All right, next we have the status bar. The status bar is this little bar that runs along the bottom right-hand side of the user interface down here. And what this does is it contains a lot of drawing display options and toggles. All right, so this is used to display different things about the user interface. For example, this button right here controls the grid lines that you see inside of the viewport. If I were to toggle that, it would turn all of these lines off and you would only just have this gray color here. And then it contains other tools such as ortho and O-snaps. Those two buttons are right here, and we're going to dive into what those do a little bit later on. All right, next we have what's known as the view cube. The view cube is this little square right here. It's actually a three-dimensional cube that you can click on and drag around. And that's used to control the view rotation of the viewport in 3D space. So mainly that's used if you had a 3D object inside of here. We're not going to be using 3D objects really at all right now in AutoCAD, so you don't have to worry about this too much. But that's really useful in case you mess up your drawing orientation, all right? And I'm going to give you a quick example of how we can use that to fix our orientation. All right, so I'm back here in AutoCAD, and I just want to give you guys a real quick example of how your viewport can easily get messed up and how we can fix it using that view cube that I just mentioned, all right? So whenever we're in AutoCAD, sometimes we'll be working, and as you can see now, we're at a perfectly top-down view of these two circles. But say something happens and I mess up that view. So for example, if you hold Shift and then you hit the middle mouse button, that's going to turn you into a 3D mode. And now you can see that my grid lines are all running crooked. Nothing is straight like it was. But also if you look at the view cube over here, you can see the actual cube is corresponding to the position of this flat plane that my circles are on, all right? Very often, I will run into students who will have accidentally messed up their viewport, and it might not be perfectly straight. So you can see right now, it looks pretty good how I just manually fixed this, but actually, this isn't totally straight like it is, and students a lot of the time won't realize this, okay? And that can really mess them up when they go to draw objects and dimension things, because it'll just be off. So to fix that, you can actually click on these different faces of the view cube, and if you get messed up, you just click on the top face, and that's going to fix everything and make it perfectly top down again. All right, so just to reiterate, if I'm off somewhere like this, and I can use the view cube and click on the top face, and that's going to bring me back to a top-down view. If we had a 3D object, you could use the other faces of the cube to rotate around and see the different faces of that object. But since this is just a 2D drawing, we're just going to worry about the top-down view. All right. So next we're going to be taking a little bit of a more detailed view of that status bar that I pointed out that runs along the bottom right-hand corner of the user interface. Okay, so going from left to right, our first button that we have here that says Model, this is used to switch between Model and Paper Space. All right, so like I said before with the layout tabs, we have two things in AutoCAD called Model Space and Paper Space. Model Space is the space that we're used to, which is that sort of gray screen with the grid, and then Paper Space is the space that we use to lay out drawings onto sheets. All right, next we have the button to turn the grid on and off. Okay, so turning a grid on and off, like I said before, that's pretty self-explanatory. That just turns off that grid that we see within our model space viewport. Next is to turn off grid snapping. That's this button right here. That button, basically what grid snapping does is any of those grid points that you see within the model space, you can actually snap to those and snap the endpoints of lines to them. Sometimes that's really useful, but often I don't like using it, so usually I have that turned off, but this is where you control that. Next is the ortho mode on and off. So what ortho mode does, you can see it right here with this right angle. That will lock any of the lines you draw to a right angle. Okay? If you have it turned off, you can draw your line in any direction, but usually when you're drafting, you want to have that on to make sure that your lines that you're drawing are perfectly straight. Next is polar tracking. That one is a little bit harder to explain. I'll show it in a little demo here later on. After that, we have the ability to enable and disable isometric drafting. So like I mentioned in the previous lecture, sometimes you'll want to use isometric drawings to convey design intent. And in this case, you can actually use AutoCAD to restrict your drawing movements to be isometric only. This isn't used very often, but you can use it to create some pretty interesting drawings. All right, next we have enable and disable reference line snapping. That one is a little bit hard to explain. You'll just have to see it here in a minute when I go through and do the demo. This one is to turn on and off object snaps. Another term for this is O-snaps, shortened down. And what object snaps do are they let you snap your cursor to different points on an object. So for example, if you had a rectangle, you could turn on a endpoint snap and that would let you lock onto any of the four corners of the circle. All right. Set annotation scale. We'll discuss annotation scales a little bit later on. Set drawing space type. This button right here is used to turn your user interface into either a drafting user interface or a 3D modeling user interface. By default, it's set to drafting, and that's what we pretty much want to always leave it as, since we aren't going to be doing any 3D modeling with it. But if for some reason it gets messed up and switched to a 3D modeling one, right here is where you would go to edit that. And then this last one right here, these three lines, these are used to control different display settings. I'll kind of show you that here in a minute. Oh, and lastly, I do want to touch on this. This button right here that is currently blue, that one is a really important button. So this is called graphics acceleration. And basically, if you have a computer that has a really good graphics card, you want to have this button blue all the time, if you can. Sometimes it won't let you depending on what kind of a computer you're running. But if you can, always make sure this is turned blue, because that's going to make AutoCAD run a lot smoother and better. If you're having problems and things are kind of laggy and not running very well, you really want to check this and make sure that this is turned on, if you can turn it on. All right, so now we're going to jump back in AutoCAD and I'll kind of show you some of these buttons in greater detail, me actually using them. All Right, so here I am back in AutoCAD, and I just want to run through those status bar icons in a little bit greater detail. So first we have the model button, okay, and this button is used to switch between model and paper space. And this will, what's displayed here, either model or paper, will change whenever you switch between the two spaces. So right now it says model, and we know that we're model space because we have this gray background with the grid. By default, we're always going to be in model space. That's where we draw all of our objects. But then if I click this, that's going to switch me over to paper space. All right, so now you can see this says paper, and my screen has changed. So paper space, this is the area that we go to lay out drawings onto sheets. Here you can see an actual sheet of paper, and this these lines that are on it right now, this is what's known as a title block. This is something that we'll cover in greater detail later on. But basically, this is just our layout space. We're going to be putting stuff on a sheet of paper. All right. So along with this are those two layout tabs that we mentioned before. Depending on if we're on the model or the paper layout tab, that's going to switch what this says. So right now, since we're on a layout, we see paper, but if I switch this back to model, it's also going to update and say model again. Okay, so next to that is the display drawing grid button, and that's pretty self-explanatory. If I click on that, you can see my drawing grid goes away. If I click on it again, it comes back. Next to this is the snap mode. Okay, so what snap mode does is that's going to let us lock on to any one of these little intersection points on the grid. Okay, so if I turn that on and then I go to draw something like a line, you have to zoom in really close to see it, but you can see that my cursor is kind of jumping around a little bit, okay? And that will let you snap on perfectly to any of these intersection points. If I were to turn that off, you can see that my cursor now just moves smoothly and freely, and I'm not locking onto those anymore. By default, I don't like having that on. I might turn it on at the very beginning of a drawing to make sure I'm snapped perfectly onto this origin point here, like that. But then after that, after I draw my first couple lines, I'll usually turn it back off. All right, so next is ortho mode. Basically, this restricts your cursor to an ortho graphic position. So if I were to go to draw a line, and I have that turned off right now, when I go to draw that, you can see that I can pretty much draw the line at any angle that I want, and then click, and then it'll stay at that angle. But if I were to turn that on, and then I go to draw my line again, now when I draw it and I move my cursor around, you can see that it only wants to snap to 90-degree increments. All right, so turn that back off, and you can see that now it's just smooth again, and I can pretty much draw that anywhere that I want. Usually you want to have this turned on because typically we're drawing perfectly straight lines. All right, so you can see as I click that and I draw around, they're all going to be perfectly straight. Okay, but then you can easily just turn it back off in the middle of the command and just start drawing lines at angles. All right, after that we have the O snap button. All right, so these are our object snaps, and you have to use this command along with the little drop-down arrow that's next to it. If you click on that drop-down arrow, that's going to give you all of these options right here, and these are the different snapping options that you have available to you. Okay, so sometimes you don't want to have too many of these on, or else it can get really annoying. Only just the few that you need that are really, important for whatever you're drawing you're working on. So usually I like to cut these down to only a few, such as maybe endpoint, midpoint, and then quadrant is good, center is good, intersection, extension, perpendicular. These are all good, but basically this is what these do. If I go to draw a new line and I have my O snaps turned on, right now that's off, but if I click that again, it's on. Anything that's blue is turned on. Now when I hover over certain points on this object, you can see how I get this like green point coming up, and it's a little square here. And that means if I click onto it, it's going to perfectly snap to that intersection right there between those two lines, okay? That one is called the endpoint snap, and it's always going to be that square shape, okay? If I hover over the midpoint of this line segment right here, you can see now I get this like green triangle coming up, and a green triangle always indicates a midpoint. And if I just let my mouse cursor stay still for a minute, you can see it actually says midpoint right there. So now if I click, it's perfect. It's going to attach perfectly to the midpoint of that line segment. All right. Now a couple other ones. If I were to just draw a line out here and then draw it toward this line here, when you get it right up against this, you can see how I get that little right angle that appears. That indicates that my line I'm drawing is going to be perfectly perpendicular to that line, and if I click, it's going to join the two at a perfect perpendicular intersection right there. All right. Say I have a circle. If I go to draw a line near my circle, and I have certain endpoint or certain O snaps turned on that relate to the circle, such as center or quadrant, I hover my cursor over the middle of that circle, it'll give me the center point that I can snap onto. All right. Along with that would be the quadrants. So if you hover over each of the 4 quadrants on this circle and you click on those, you can snap to them too. All right. So then next, I'm going to skip over these annotation scales for right now. They're not as important. This is the hardware acceleration button. Like I said, you want to have this on because it's going to make your interface move as smoothly as possible. Sometimes if your computer isn't very good or it's not very strong, you might not be able to turn this on. It really just depends. If I turn this off though, let's see if it'll even let me. It might not even let me. But basically it would make the whole thing move around really like slowly and sluggishly. So just make sure that's blue if you can make it blue. And then next is just this last little icon here. This just lets you toggle on a bunch of different options for the user interface. You might not necessarily need to mess with these, but you know, they're just there in case you need them. I usually don't ever have to touch this, but you might. Graphics performance. Basically what this does is it just adds extra icons to this in case you need them. But usually I don't need anything more than what's there. All right. Oh, I guess I did skip over the polar tracking right here. So what this one does, this will restrict you to certain angles instead of, it goes along with ortho, but you can restrict it to specific angles, and these angles can be determined by using this flyout button here. So here, say I want like 45-degree angles along with, you know, my 90-degree angles. Instead of using ortho mode, I could turn this on, and now whenever I go to draw a line, it'll create this green extension line and automatically snap me to like 45-degree increments. All right. So again, if I turn that off, you can see I'm not snapping anything, but turn it back on, and it gives me this like sort of indicator that it's going to snap me at those 45-degree increments. All right. So this slide provides a list of some of the most commonly used commands in AutoCAD. We break this down by drawing commands and modify commands. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this slide. I'm actually just going to jump right into AutoCAD and provide you a small demonstration of each of these. So if you want to read the descriptions, go ahead and pause the video now. So here we are back in AutoCAD, and I'm just going to run through each of those commands that I showed you on the slide really quickly. All right, so as I'm going through these, take a look at the keyboard and the mouse that I'm overlaying in the bottom right corner, just so that you understand exactly what I'm typing and pressing on my mouse. All right, so first up we have the line command. All right, so you can activate any of these commands either by clicking directly on them or just typing into the command line. So for the first one, I'm just going to type line. All right, so now it's asking us to specify the first point of the line, and all we have to do is click once to specify that, and then click again, drag our mouse and click again to specify the next point in the line. Now the command continues, and we can keep adding line segments if we want, and then if we want to end the command, we can either hit the escape key or enter. All right, so I'm going to hit escape, and that ends us out of the command. Okay, so then next we have the polyline command, and this command is very similar to the line command, except it creates a connected sequence of segments, all right? And all these segments together act as just one connected object. And also, as I'm going through this, if you hover over any of these tools in the toolbar and just leave the cursor there, you can see a nice graphical description of exactly what all of these commands do. So if you ever get confused, just take a look at the tooltips that pop up when you hover over them. All right, so polyline, I'm going to click on that. And I'm just going to do the same thing, and I'm going to draw a similar looking line with 3 segments. All right, and then I'm going to hit enter to end my command. Now what you're going to notice, and this is the difference between these two commands, when I hover over the lines that I generated using the line command, you can see each of these segments highlights individually. All right, and I can click on one and it acts individually of the other two, or independently of the other two. All right, now if I go to the other one, as I hover over that, it's all connected, and when I click on that, all the segments highlight together. All right. Usually you're going to want to use polyline for a lot of your things, but sometimes we do use the line command as well. Okay. All right, so the next command on our list is the hatch command. So the hatch command, which is right here, is basically a fill command. It's used to add like a poche to enclosed areas, and you can do this to any area that is totally perfectly enclosed. This is the command that we use to add fills to our walls for floor plans, for example, and we use it for a lot of other things too. So to use this command, you have to start by having a solid object to fill in. All right, so I'm just going to use a circle because that's easy. So I'm just going to click once, drag out, and then click again, and then I'm going to click on the hatch command. And now to use this command, you just have to highlight your cursor inside of the region that you want, and then you click. All right, so now that creates the hatch, and you'll see that this new menu popped up here in the ribbon. This is the hatch properties menu, and we can do a lot of things with this. We can change the pattern that's within our hatch, and we can also change like the scale, for example, or the angle. So for example, I'm just going to make it like a brick pattern, or we could switch it to, let's see, this diamond pattern, and we could up the scale a little bit. Let's try 50. All right, see, we can jump between different patterns, and this is really useful for things also like if you're drawing an elevation and you're trying to represent like a backsplash and you have like a tile pattern, you can put that in, and see, just like that, there you have backsplash tile, and you don't have to go in and draw each of those lines individually, which is really nice. Okay. All right, so the next command, we're going to talk about the modify commands now a little bit. There's a few more in here, but they're pretty self-explanatory, and I don't really want to waste time jumping into them because you can mess around with these for yourself. There's rectangle and ellipse, all of that. It's pretty self-explanatory, and we're going to use them as we do actual drawings together. But now I'm going to talk about some of the modify commands, all right? So I'm just going to add a shape back in here to demonstrate these. So first we have the move command. That's pretty self-explanatory. All it does is move an object a specified distance from one point to another. All right, so I'm going to click on the move command, and then first I need to select the object I want to move. So I'm going to click on the circle, and now once I've clicked on my circle, I have to hit the enter command to proceed to the next step. All right, so I'm going to hit the enter key. And now it's asking us to move it from a base point or specify a displacement down here. I'm just going to select a base point, and basically you can choose any location. Later on you'll see base points are a little bit more important on what you choose, but pretty much you can just click anywhere, and then once you click you can drag your mouse in a certain direction, and now at this point you can either click again to confirm. Alright, so I just clicked arbitrarily and moved that just an arbitrary distance away from where it was. Or what you can do, I'm going to go back to that same step. When you're right here, you can actually type in the distance you want to move it. Alright, so let's say I want to move it 3 feet to the left. I can now just type 3 feet and then hit enter, and that's going to have moved it 3 feet to the left. Alright, so that didn't look like it moved it very much. If I do it again and I move it a little bit more, something more drastic, say like 100 feet. All right, now it's all the way over there at 100 feet. Okay. Next, we have the copy command. That's pretty much the same as the move command, except it's going to make a duplicate of the object. Right. So we're going to select our object and then hit copy. Specify our base point. You can really just click anywhere for this, and then you move in whatever direction you want, and then click again, or type in your distance that you want. Okay, so I'm just going to click again, and this command, it just keeps going until you decide to end it with the escape or enter key. Alright, so now if I type like 100 for this, 100 feet, you can see now I copied that one 100 feet, and then this one I could just place manually. So there's a lot of ways that you can modify these objects as you're using these commands. Alright, we also have the stretch command. I'm not really going to talk about that one because it's not used too much, but basically that's used to kind of stretch or extend an object. Next we have the rotate command. Alright, so to do the rotate command, I'm just going to draw a line within the circle. Alright, just like a clock or something. So now to rotate, I'm going to click on rotate, and then I'm going to select that line, and then I'm going to hit enter. Now it's going to ask us to specify our base point. Alright, so this is where base points are important. Alright, because if I clicked out here, that's going to be the central point where the rotation is going to happen. But say I just want to rotate it based on the central point right here, as if this was a hand on a clock. Okay, so what I want to do for my base point is click on that central point and then start to rotate. So now you can see it's rotating from that point. Alright, so with this you can type in whatever angle you want as your rotation value, or just like the copy and move commands, you can click anywhere you want to move it an arbitrary degree. Okay, so I'm just going to type 45, and now you can see that that has rotated up at a 45-degree angle. Alright, next we have the mirror command, and the mirror command, pretty self-explanatory. That's just going to mirror whatever object you want over an axis that you define. All right. So if I select my line here and I type in mirror, it's asking us to specify the first point of our mirror line. All right. So this is our axis of reflection that we're going to be drawing in. Okay. So I'm going to click to specify my base point, and now if I drag it either up or down, it's going to reflect it to the left. If I drag it either right or left, it's going to reflect my shape down. Okay? And once you are happy with your axis, all you have to do is click on your mouse one more time. And now you can see down here in the command line, it's asking us, do we want to erase the source object or leave it? Alright, so if you say yes, it's going to erase this original line. If you say no, it's going to just create this duplicate. Alright, so I'm going to hit yes, and now you can see it's mirrored it and it's gotten rid of the original. Alright, next we have the scale command. So first we're going to highlight these two objects, and then I'm going to click on scale right here. Okay, so again, specify base point. This is kind of important because this is the point it's going to scale from. Alright, so I'm going to click on this middle point here, and now I'm just going to start dragging my mouse outward a little bit, and you can see it's very hard to tell, but it's scaling it up way too big right now. Alright, so what we can do is I'm going to back up and I'm going to show you a little trick here with the scale tool. We want to use these command line options to make things a little bit easier on ourselves, okay? So I'm going to select this again, and I'm going to click on scale. I'm going to choose my base point again, but this time I'm going to go down here to the command line, and I'm going to choose this reference option, okay? So when I click on reference, it's going to ask me to select my base point one more time, but now I can select another point that I want to scale from, basically. So if I click on this point here, you can see now I'm able to control my scaling a lot better. All right, and if there was some other object out here that I want to scale to, I could snap to it and scale this perfectly to a set distance. You also have the option to just type in a dimension as well. So like if you want to scale it up by like 2 or 3 feet, for example, you could just type that, or you can just click like any of the other commands. Another thing really quick with those options is if I run this command one more time, if you click to specify the base point and then you go down here to copy, that's going to basically just create a duplicate of whatever you've done. All right, so this one is going to scale up really big. It's very hard to control it if you aren't using that reference tool that I just showed you. But basically, if I click again, it's creating a copy and leaving the original intact. Okay, next we're going to talk about fillet. So what fillet does is it will round off corners of objects. Actually, I'm going to create a rectangle to demonstrate this a little bit more. All right, so if I use this rectangle tool and I just draw in a rectangle or a square, what we can do is we can break this apart, and then we can use the fillet tool. All right, and when we select the fillet tool right here, it's asking us to select our first object and our second object. So basically, these are the two lines that have an intersection that you want to round off. All right, so let's say I want to round off this intersection. First, I'm going to select this top line, and then I'm going to select this line. Okay. Now, it looked like nothing happened because I didn't define an actual radius to round this off to. So I'm going to run that one more time. And now, if you look here in the command options, there's this radius option right here. You can either click on it or you can just type the word or type the letter R and hit enter. You can see that R is highlighted in blue. That means you can just type in R and hit enter. So now it's asking us to specify the fillet radius. Let's do something like 5 feet. All right. So now if I go over these, you can see as I go to select my second line, it wants to round this off. And if I click one more time on my mouse, it's rounding that off at a 5-foot radius. Okay. The next command, which is chamfer, that is located underneath of the fillet dropdown, basically does the same thing, except it's going to draw a 45-degree segment between the two. All right. So if I go to do this corner now, and here we actually have to set a distance for the chamfer. So I'm going to click on distance. This is the equivalent to the radius with the fillet command. I'm going to set my distance to 5 feet and hit enter. And now I'm going to do the same thing where I select my first line, then my second line, and you can see here now we have a 45-degree angle that has a distance of 5 feet. All right. Okay, so next we have the join command. So the join command is basically to make all these line segments behave as one solid object. Okay, so right now you can see when I hover over these, they all highlight individually. If I want all these to act as a single unified object, I have to highlight everything that I want, okay, and then I have to use the join command. Okay, so this one, there's not really a button for it up here, so you're just going to have to type in join, J-O-I-N, and hit enter. Once you do that, you can see down here it says 6 objects converted to 1 polyline. And now if I hover over this, you can see that all of it highlights together and it now says that it's a polyline. Okay, and if I click on it, everything turns blue. Okay, the opposite of the join command is the explode command. And the explode command is this little icon right here. And all this will do is just break apart any line segments that you've joined together. Okay, so if I click on my object and then I click on the join button or explode button or I type in explode, it's going to break that back apart into individual line segments. All right, next up we're going to talk about trim and extend. Trim and extend are really important. You're going to be using these like pretty much all the time. It might be one of the most used commands that there is. All right, so first we have the trim command right here, and extend is underneath it. All right, so I'm going to draw just a few lines that are intersecting with one another. And by the way, when you're drawing or using commands, if you just hit the enter key, it's going to repeat the last command that you just did. So I initiated the line command, and now anytime I want to draw a new line segment, I just hit enter, and you can see that it starts that line command all over again. All right. So here we have a bunch of different line segments, and I'm going to draw one more that intersects through them. And actually, I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to use this grip, and I'm going to stretch it down here and click again to make that a little bit shorter. You'll see what I'm going to do with that. All right, so first I'm going to demonstrate the trim command. All right, so to use trim, you can either just click on the button or you can select the objects that you want to trim first. All right, so I'm going to show you the simplest way. First, what you want to do is select what's known as the fence. All right, and the fence is basically a plane that is you're going to use to cut the object off. All right, so I'm going to use this long line that goes through everything as my fence. All right, now I'm going to type trim. Okay, and now that I have my fence selected, all I have to do is highlight over the individual segments that I want to get rid of. And you can see as I hover over these intersections, a red X appears, and that is just giving me a preview, and it's saying if I click, it's going to delete that portion of the line. All right, so let's say I want to get rid of this one, and this one. Now, since nothing else is intersecting, and since I cut those off, I can't delete these three. It has to be something that's going all the way through for it to delete it. All right. All right, now on the other hand, this is how I like to use the trim tool. I like to do a right to left extend or selection. All right, and we're going to talk about selections later on in our PowerPoint, so don't worry, I'll explain how you do this selection. But basically, I want to select everything that's right here. And then after I've selected everything, I want to click on trim. And now what this is going to do is it's going to give me more freedom to trim any one of these segments off, okay? So that way I don't have to worry about selecting the correct fence line. I just select everything, and then whatever I want to trim off, I just use the trim tool and I trim it off. It's very simple, all right? Okay, so next I want to talk about the extend tool. So the extend works very similar to trim, except it is used to extend a line to a particular fence that you've selected. All right, so first we're going to select our fence. We're going to go up here and we're going to use the extend tool, or you can type extend, and then we're going to select the line that we want to extend. And you can see as I hover over the endpoint of that line, it wants to jump up to that fence point. All right, so we're just going to click once, and then there we go. It's extended all the way, and it's perfectly intersecting right at that line. A couple other useful things that you can do is you can actually also use the fillet and chamfer tools to do trimming and extending, all right? So let me demonstrate that just really quick. I'm going to copy a couple of these lines over. All right, so if I want to clean up these intersections using either the chamfer or the fillet tool, they both work the same way, so I'm just going to use fillet. What we want to do is either set our radius for fillet or our distance for chamfer to be 0. All right, so we're going to click on the radius, and I'm going to type in 0 and hit enter. And now, if you select if you select two segments of this line, you can see it's going to clean those up and just make them a 90-degree angle. All right, so let's say I want to keep these two segments. I'm going to click on this one first and then click on this one, and you can get a preview and you can see that these two segments are going to disappear. As I hover over other segments, you can see what happens. Those two disappear and then these two disappear. So then if I click, you can see that it just cuts those off and it makes a nice little 90-degree angle. All right, so the same is true if you're using this to extend. So let's say I have something like this and I'm missing a corner here and I want these two segments to meet at a perfect corner right here. Well, I can do the same thing, use the fillet command, click on my first line, click on my second line, and as I hover over that, you can see what it's going to do. It's going to extend the two and they're going to meet perfectly at that corner. All right, so I'm just going to click one more time and there we go. It's cleaned that up and it's made it a perfect 90-degree corner. All right, the last command that I'm going to demonstrate is the offset command. All right, so what offset does is it's going to create a copy of, well, you don't have to do a copy, but it's going to take and it's going to basically, copy is the best word that I can use to explain it. Copy it either at a set distance inside or outside of your object, okay? So I'm going to click on this and then I'm going to use my offset command. And it's asking me to specify the offset distance, okay? So I'm going to do an offset distance of 5 feet. And now you can see when I move my cursor inside of this square, you can see this preview of this white line where it's offsetting. It's basically copying that inward, all right? If I move my cursor outside, you can see it's going to offset it outward, okay? Now I'm going to show you a couple of the command options within offset. All right, so if I run the command again, you can see that we can do multiple offsets. So if I click on that, we can just keep clicking and offsetting infinitely as many times as we want. It's just going to keep going until I can't do it anymore. Let me get rid of those. If I do it again, we can also do this option where it says through. So if we don't want to specify a specific distance, we can just use the through option, select our line, and now we can just arbitrarily go inside or outside and offset at whatever distance we want. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Okay, but the reason why offset is really useful is because we can use it to quickly draw in walls for like a floor plan. So now you can see what I've done here basically is created a 5-inch thick wall for like a house or something, and that was like super simple. I just had to create one shape and then offset it, and now we get a nice 5-inch thick wall. And now if we want to add in even more, all we would do is add in some lines, maybe for a door or something. So there's a line there, copy it down 3 feet. All right, this is a really big building, but basically, let me try it again. All right, just imagine that's a door. All right, so we can use our trim and we can get rid of these segments we don't want. Okay, and now you can see that we have a nice cleaned up little gap here where we can walk through. All right, not a great scaled example, but you get the idea. We can use offset in conjunction with like trim and stuff to create in openings for our windows and doors and stuff like that in our floor plans. All right, so next I want to discuss the different selection modes that we have available to us in AutoCAD. As we're making our drawings, there's going to be situations where we want to select certain objects in certain ways. Maybe we have a group of lines that are all close together and we want to isolate only a few of them. Or maybe we have another situation where we want to select as many objects as we can on the screen at the same time. And to do that, we have these different selection modes available to us. All right, so if you look at these 4 GIFs that I've made, these are going to really help you out as I'm trying to explain this. All right, so as you look at these GIFs, pay close attention to the mouse icon in the bottom right and take a look at what it's doing. All right, and also watch the cursor closely and the direction it's moving. All right, so first of all, we have rectangular selection modes. And these rectangular selection modes are done by clicking on one side of the object and then releasing the mouse button, dragging the mouse to the opposite side of the object, and then clicking again to confirm the selection. All right. So you can see here to do the first rectangular selection, being the blue one, we start at the top left of the object, we click once, we release our click, and then we drag it to the bottom right of the object, and then we click again to confirm. The same is true for the green one, except to do the green one, we start at the top right and then we move to the bottom left. All right, so now what's the difference between the blue and the green? Well, the blue selection region is going to select anything that is fully within it. All right, so this is really useful for isolating certain objects within our drawing. If you want to quickly isolate some line work that's touching a bunch of other line work, you're going to want to use the blue selection. All right, so if you look really closely, you'll notice that the circle does not highlight until the blue region is fully around it. Okay, now if you look at the green one, as soon as that cursor touches the edge of the circle, the whole thing highlights. All right, so that's the main difference between the two colors. Now, we also have these freeform selections below, and we do these by first starting on one side of the object, just like the rectangular one, but this time we click and we hold the mouse button down, and then we drag our selection, and then we release to confirm. Okay, so key words here: hold and release, and click and release. Okay, so these act the same way as the rectangular selections. The only difference is they're more freeform, and it's sort of like a lasso tool, and you can use it to sort of draw a custom shape around anything that you want to select. I typically don't use the freeform selections very much, but you can if you want to. It's all dependent on the situation that you're in and what you need to select. All right. All right, so next we're going to be talking about layers. So layers are used to control the visibility of the different elements that we have in the model space of our drawings. Okay, so for each different type of object we'll be drawing, there will be a unique layer. All right, so for example, there's going to be a layer for walls, a layer for doors, a layer for windows, and a lot of other ones as well. But we turn these layers on and off in order to create different types of drawings. All right, so what do I mean by that? For example, we might have our floor plan, but then we want to create a construction plan. So for that, we'll turn on the dimension layers or other layers that are related to a construction plan. And then say we want to create a furniture plan. Well, in that case, we might turn off our dimension layers and then turn on our furniture layers so that we can represent what would be on the furniture plan. Okay? So basically, all of these elements that are on the different layers are going to be stacked right on top of each other, but they're not always going to be visible based on what we have turned on and turned off. Okay? Layers can also be used to control different attributes of objects, such as their line type or line weight. All right, so any object that we assign to a specific layer, we can tie those attributes to the layer so that as soon as the object is assigned to that layer, it'll automatically update and take on the characteristics that we've assigned to it. All right. We have different commands here on the right side that you can see, and these commands are used to first create new layers. This one's used to freeze layers, which essentially hides them from our view. And then this one's here to delete layers. So this layer properties manager, that's something that I'm going to show you here in a minute within AutoCAD. There's also a bunch of layer standards that you guys are going to have to get used to that are used within the industry. And I have those all within a document that I'm going to place within the Blackboard folder. So please make sure you reference that to know what kind of layers go into typical construction documents. All right, so we're back here in AutoCAD really quick, and I just wanted to show you the layers panel up here in the ribbon. Okay, so if we click on our layer properties, that's going to give us this window here on the side that shows us all the layers that are currently in the project. Within the layer properties, we can do things like create new layers, freeze layers, and delete layers. Okay, so for example, if I want to make a new layer, I click on that and you can see it created that and it just calls it layer 1. I can rename that layer to be, say, test. Okay, and then click enter to confirm. So like I was saying in the PowerPoint, we can control different attributes of each layer. All right, so let's say any object that I have on test, I want that to display as a magenta line, okay? And I want that to be maybe a dashed line type. All right, so now if I go in here and I select different objects, I can use this drop-down menu to control what layer they go on, okay? So let's say I put those on the test layer. They're going to show up with a magenta line, and then they're going to have a dashed line type. All right, let's do that for one of these too, so you can see how the line type changes. All right, so when we switch that, you can see here as I put that on test, now it's going to adopt any of these settings that we inputted right here into the layer settings. All right. So when you look through this, you can see that there are some here by default. So we have like electrical, door, plumbing, wall, windows. And like I said, there's a set of standards that dictate the naming convention for each of these layers, as well as the color and the line type, and also the line weight that each of these are going to be using. All right. So just reference that document that I have on Blackboard within the learning module to understand what type of layers we're going to be using whenever we go to do our drawings. All right, so lastly, I just wanted to touch on blocks. Blocks are basically predefined drawings that can be saved and reused throughout the drawings that you're going to be making. And essentially, they're just a grouping of line work, okay? So you can create your own blocks, or you can use blocks that you find within online libraries. You can download them and import them into your projects and stuff. But basically, this over here, this is an example of a double door block. You also have blocks for things like windows and single doors. Basically, like any sort of object that you need to put into your drawing, other than walls and stuff that you're going to be drawing on your own, it'll be some kind of a block that you're inserting into the drawing. All right. And common blocks, these include doors, windows, and pieces of equipment such as appliances or sinks, toilets, things along those lines.